Okay, so this little video we could call Sources of Law. This is a visualization that corresponds to the reading from the Chapter 1 excerpt reading, which sort of gave you a sort of crash course in how law works and how the legal system works. And so what I've done is I've taken the essential stuff, especially the parts that are most relevant to us, and I've created a visualization that basically sums up that whole reading from last week, and I'm going to do one more short visualization to show you. Just to be open about the pedagogy here, the visualization helps you remember, right? Because most people today are visual learners and oral learners, and students are less and less textbook learners. So the reading is there, and then the visualization bolsters the reading to try to really pin down the important parts. So as we're talking about law throughout the semester, we've got to be clear about what kind of law are we talking about. So if you talk about, for example, protection of journalists' confidential sources, this came up in the news recently because last week there was a reporter at the New York Times, the government was trying to force her to divulge her confidential sources. And so when we talk about that later in the semester, we're going to be in this area because the North Carolina General Assembly has passed what is called a shield law protecting journalists, right? So that's not a First Amendment issue. So we've got to talk about these different types of law. And let me just talk through this and get out of the way so you can write it down. Common law is law that accrues over time through court cases. In other words, it's not written down somewhere like a rule book. We have to read a line of cases and as the law develops, see how the law develops. Law that accrues over time through court cases. And we say that we no longer have common law at the federal level because constitutional law replaced it. But it's very important at the state level. So for example, when we're talking about libel law is common law that plays out pretty much at the state level. And so, like for example, the NC Supreme Court would be very important for that area of law. Constitutional law, which is what we'll be talking about a lot in this class, obviously, because the First Amendment is constitutional law. That's law that accrues through interpretation of the Constitution. Law that accrues through interpretation of the Constitution. And that plays out in federal courts. So all First Amendment cases go through the federal courts. Law that accrues over time through cases plays out at the state level. And so NC Supreme Court would be an example of here's where we're going to go to find out about how libel law works. Law that accrues through interpretation of the Constitution plays out in federal courts, and obviously we're going to be talking most about the Supreme Court. The judicial branch controls that. The legislative branch, statutory law. Law that is made by elected bodies. Law that is made by elected bodies. And so for our purposes, we'll talk, Congress will come up, obviously, at the federal level, and the NC General Assembly. So I just gave an example. NC General Assembly makes lots of laws that affect the media and communications professionals. And then finally, administrative law. Administrative law. That's controlled by the executive branch. Think about how we say things like the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration. So administrative law is controlled by the president, right? All of those agencies that you think are independent really are not. They're all controlled by the president. And the ones that we'll be dealing with most this semester are Federal Trade Commission, which will be crucially important for advertising, PR, marketing, and then FCC, which greatly affects broadcast television, broadcast radio. And so these are our sources of law: common law, constitutional law, statutory law, administrative law, and each has a corresponding branch of the government. So all three co-equal branches of government get in on the act. All three branches of government make law.